Good evening from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking live at the fourth segment of the new launch pad tower under construction for the SpaceX Starship and Super Heavy vehicle in motion this evening toward Launch Complex 39A. This follows the move of three initial segments of the tower out to pad 39A to begin the buildup of that large structure last month. And now, as a thunderstorm is approaching the Kennedy Space Center this evening, the move is getting underway a little earlier than the previous moves, perhaps to beat this incoming inclement weather. You may be able to hear some of the wind noise from my microphone as this storm builds just to the north of the Kennedy Space Center. There's currently no rainfall or anything, any precipitation over the Space Center, but there is some lightning off to the north. Not sure if that's any risk for this move, but apparently SpaceX doesn't believe so, because they're proceeding with the transfer this evening from the staging area where SpaceX is building up these gantry structures down at Roberts Road, just to the southwest, a few miles to the southwest of the vehicle assembly building, on this journey out to pad 39A. In a few moments, you'll see the gantry segment, which itself stands about 5 stories tall, move by the iconic NASA Vehicle Assembly Building here at the Kennedy Space Center, which is more than 50 stories in height, as it follows this 2-lane road out toward Launch Complex 39A. As you're watching this structure move out toward Complex 39A, it's moving east on Saturn Causeway right now, accompanied by SpaceX support teams, as well as a NASA security escort for this journey. The first tower segment rolled out to Launch Complex 39A back on June the 15th. That was followed by segment number 2 on June the 22nd, and then the third segment back on June the 27th. So it's been a little more than three weeks now since the third segment moved out to Launch Complex 39A. There was a SpaceX Falcon 9 launch in that interim period out at the Launch Pad 39A area. And now, with no launch from Pad 39A currently in progress in campaign, SpaceX is moving segment number 4 out to the pad. There is a Falcon 9 launch scheduled from Pad 39A this Sunday, another Starlink mission with the next batch of internet satellites for SpaceX's broadband network. Here you can see some of the personnel accompanying this structure on its way out to Pad 39A. This is moving out to the pad on a transporter, a special transporter SpaceX has built to carry these tower segments as well as future Starship flight elements out to the launch pad from the Roberts Road staging area near Hangar X here at the Kennedy Space Center. That's where SpaceX is building up each of these segments and outfitting them with their hardware and some of the support structure before moving them out to Pad 39A, where a crane awaits to lift each segment on top of the other to build up this structure, which will eventually stand more than 450 feet tall. That'll be the second tallest structure here at the Kennedy Space Center, following the vehicle assembly building. Looks like this move has taken a bit of a detour. Instead of heading out toward Pad 39A, it's actually entering the road here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. We're not sure the reason for that. It may be to wait out this storm that's just to the north of the Kennedy Space Center, but it's actually moving toward our location now. If you're just joining us, you're watching a live view of the fourth tower segment for SpaceX's Starship and Super Heavy orbital launch site here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This segment is about halfway along its journey from the SpaceX staging area down at Roberts Road, just to the southwest of the Vehicle Assembly Building, on the way to Launch Complex 39A. The move has been stopped, at least temporarily, here very near our location at the Kennedy Space Center press site. A storm is building to the north of the spaceport right now. We're not sure if this stop has to do with waiting out that inclement weather or some other issue. But we'll continue to bring you this live view as long as we can. As we continue to stream this live view of the Starship Tower segment, we do expect, we're hearing that this stop here at the Kennedy Space Center press site will extend for some period of time this evening. We'll continue to bring you this live view of the Starship Tower as long as we can. We are going to pause our commentary, though. We're going to take some refuge from this storm, which could be the cause of this delay in moving the Starship Tower segment. This transfer of about 7 miles or so from the Roberts Road facility that SpaceX operates just to the southwest of the Vehicle Assembly Building out to Pad 39A. This 7-mile journey is about halfway complete when the tower segment reaches our location at the press site. But we're going to pause our commentary, take some refuge from this storm, and resume our commentary and updates momentarily as we wait for this move to resume. Hello again from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Stephen Clark from spaceflightnow.com. You're continuing to look at a live view of the vehicle assembly building area here at the Kennedy Space Center, where the fourth segment for SpaceX's Starship slash Super Heavy launch site tower is currently holding position. SpaceX has paused this move from area, where SpaceX the Starship staging area, where SpaceX builds up each of these segments before transferring them out to the launch pad. This segment is about halfway along its journey from that Roberts Road area to Launch Complex 39A, where SpaceX is erecting this gantry tower. There will be 9 segments in total once the tower is completed. This is the fourth of those 9 segments being transferred to Pad 39A tonight. But the move is on hold for now due to a storm that's developed near the Kennedy Space Center. There's some thunder and lightning on the horizon. If you've been watching our stream, you may have seen some of those lightning flashes in the distance to the north of the Kennedy Space Center. So the transfer is on hold right now while SpaceX awaits for this storm to move over the area or dissipate. The move is expected to resume later on this evening. We don't have an estimate for that, but it is on hold right now. This segment is riding one of SpaceX's specially designed transporters that's designed to haul each of these tower segments out to the pad, as well as future flight elements of the Starship and Super Heavy from the factory that SpaceX is building down at the Roberts Road area on NASA property here at the Kennedy Space Center to the pad for future flight operations. You're continuing to look live at the segment number 4 for SpaceX's Starship Super Heavy Orbital Launch Site here at the Kennedy Space Center. This is the fourth of 9 segments needed to build up this large tower structure that's being erected out at Launch Complex 39A for SpaceX's next generation reusable Starship program. The move to Pad 39A from a nearby staging area is on hold right now due to a storm in the area. We believe that's the reason for this hold. There has been some thunder and lightning visible and audible here at the Florida Spaceport for the last half hour or more, and now some rainfalls beginning here at the press site at our location just a few hundred feet from this Starship Tower segment, which has now paused its move to wait out this inclement weather. For those of you contributing to our coverage in our chat stream and the super chat, we appreciate that. Thank you to Lab Padre. Thank you to Space News Pod. And thank you to Mouser 58907 for your contributions. Any contribution you can provide to us through our YouTube channel, either joining and becoming a member of our channel or contributing in our chat, goes a long way to helping us continue and expand our coverage of launches as well as activities like tonight's, this move of the Starship segment, launch pad segment to Complex 39A. You're now looking at a live view of Launch Complex 39A, the destination for tonight's operation, to move this Starship pad tower segment out to Launch Complex 39A. You can see those, if you look closely, you can see those blue flashing lights around the pad. That's associated with the lightning warning that's in effect here at the Kennedy Space Center from this thunderstorm. On the right side of your screen, you're looking at the destination for this Starship segment, tower segment. On the right side, you can see the large crane that's sticking up into the sky. That's awaiting the arrival of this fourth gantry segment at the base of the pad. And that crane will hoist this individual tower segment onto the three segments already in place at Pad 39A last month. This is the fourth of as many as 9 tower segments that will be moved out to the pad in the coming weeks. The first 3 moved out from the Roberts Road staging area just to the southwest of the Vehicle Assembly Building, a few miles to the southwest of the VAB, to Pad 39A, and were lifted one by one by this crane. And we expect once this tower segment is out at Pad 39A, we expect later this week we'll see that crane in action lifting this segment onto those 3 initial segments. On the left-hand side of your screen, you're looking at the Falcon 9 launch site at Pad 39A. That's where SpaceX launches Falcon 9 missions, including crew flights up to the International Space Station. The Strongback Transporter Erector arm is currently vertical at Pad 39A. We expect to see that moved into the hangar just to the south of the pad very soon, perhaps tonight or tomorrow, to prepare for the next Falcon 9 launch from Pad 39A that's scheduled for Sunday morning. That transporter erector will be moved back into the hangar where SpaceX's ground team will integrate the Falcon 9 with the transporter erector arm, and then that transporter erector arm will be returned to Pad 39A for the launch this weekend with the next batch of Starlink internet satellites. The gantry for the Starship orbital launch site will eventually stand more than 450 feet tall. It'll greatly eclipse the height of the fixed service structure used for the Falcon 9 rocket on the left side of your screen. It'll rise well above the height of that structure, as well as the height of the lightning mast on top of that tower. And it will approach the height of the Vehicle Assembly Building here at the Kennedy Space Center, which is 525 feet tall. And the Starship orbital launch site will become the second tallest structure on Florida's Space Coast, taller than any other launch pad gantry, either at KSC or Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Once again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at a live view of Launch Complex 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The activity we're covering tonight is the transfer of the next tower segment for the Starship launch pad gantry at Complex 39A. This tower segment is currently parked near our location at the Kennedy Space Center press site, about halfway along its road journey from the SpaceX staging and construction site down at Roberts Road, just southwest of the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, to Pad 39A. So this move is about halfway complete, but SpaceX teams have paused the transfer, to wait out the inclement weather here at the Kennedy Space Center. You can see this view now. You're looking again live at the gantry segment parked at the entrance to the press site here at KSC with the Vehicle Assembly Building behind it. The skies have lightened somewhat in the last few minutes as this thunderstorm lurks just to the north of the Kennedy Space Center. We don't expect the resumption of the move to be imminent, but we do anticipate the move continuing later on this evening for the rest of the journey to Pad 39A. About 3 miles remain on the trip out to the launch pad. At normal speeds, the gantry segment should cover that 3-mile transfer in about an hour or so, or maybe an hour and a half, depending on what kind of time the transporter makes along this 2-lane road from the Vehicle Assembly Building area out to Pad 39A. SpaceX is and construction crews here at the Kennedy Space Center, in conjunction with NASA, are working on widening segments of this road to ease the transfer of future Starship-related hardware from the construction site, the factory that's being built up elsewhere here at the Kennedy Space Center, to Pad 39A for future operations. Again, to recap, if you're just joining our coverage of this activity this evening here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, you're looking at the fourth segment of SpaceX's Starship orbital launch site tower, sitting at the entrance to the Kennedy Space Center press site, where the move out to Pad 39A was halted and paused a little more, about nearly an hour ago now, to wait out stormy weather that's affecting the spaceport area here in Central Florida. This gantry segment stands about 5 stories tall, and it's sitting on a self-propelled transporter. This 96-wheel transporter is carrying the Starship segment and will carry future segments of the pad gantry as well as flight hardware to Pad 39A as SpaceX builds out the Starship base here in Texas. This is the second Starship base that SpaceX is building following the construction of the Starbase facility down in South Texas near Brownsville, Texas, where SpaceX intends to conduct the first orbital test flight of the Starship and Super Heavy vehicle later this year. This launch site here in Florida is not expected to be online until likely sometime next year at the earliest, but will be built to support operational Starship missions, while the Texas site, according to SpaceX, is likely to remain focused on research and development and experimental flights, including the very important, long-awaited, widely watched first orbital test flight for the Super Heavy and Starship vehicle. I was able to thank a few of you earlier for your contributions in the chat. I want to add my thanks to Tom Brooks and Tom Cray for their contributions. Any contribution through our YouTube channel, either becoming a member of our channel or through the chat function, helps us support our coverage and continue bringing you live video of launches here in Florida and coverage of space news around the world, as well as activities like tonight's, which is not a launch, but is another step forward for the Starship program that SpaceX is developing. This is a fully reusable next generation rocket that will stand about 400 feet tall. It'll produce more than 15 million pounds of thrust with its Raptor engines firing. It'll be the most powerful rocket in history. And this is one of 9 segments for the gantry that will support these Starship launches here in Florida. As you can see, the gantry segment is back on the move again, with the weather conditions having improved sufficiently to allow SpaceX to move forward with this transfer to Launch Complex 39A. This tower segment stands about 5 stories tall and is riding on this 96-wheel transporter for the 7-mile journey to Pad 39A from the Roberts Road construction site uh, elsewhere here at the Kennedy Space Center. And the self-propelled transporter is now moving eastbound on the Saturn Causeway, passing just by the vehicle assembly building after backing out of its temporary parking spot at the entrance to the press site. Wonderful view here of this transporter making its way east, right by the vehicle assembly building on the way to Pad 39A. This is the fourth of 9 tower segments that SpaceX is working on and erecting at Pad 39A. 3 are already in place. This is number 4. There are additional tower segments currently in different stages of fabrication and readiness at the Roberts Road staging area, a few miles to the southwest of the launch pad and vehicle assembly building area. The vehicle assembly building you see behind uh, on the other side of the road, opposite from the Starship Tower segment, stands 525 feet tall. And in the most distant high bay, the high bay to the in the distance and to the right, on the right side of the VAB, is the High Bay 3 door, and inside High Bay 3 is NASA's Space Launch System, the large moon rocket that is being prepared for its first test flight on the Artemis 1 mission to the moon, scheduled no earlier than August the 29th. NASA announced that preliminary target date today. They're setting up for tentative launch dates, launch opportunities on August 29th, September 2nd, and September the 5th. And we expect to see the Space Launch System reemerge from the vehicle assembly building around August the 18th, if the schedule holds for a late August launch. This self-propelled transporter is now moving over a particularly narrow stretch of road. This is an area of the road that is slated to be widened to better accommodate future moves of flight hardware out toward Pad 39A and other launch complexes here on Florida's Space Coast. This is the road that SpaceX intends to use to transfer future Super Heavy boosters and Starship vehicles from the factory that they're building here at KSC out to the launch site. This road is also used to transfer other flight hardware elements out to the pad, such as and payloads for United Launch Alliance and other launch operators here on the Space Coast, as well as Falcon rocket boosters for SpaceX's Falcon 9 missions. We're continuing to look live at the Starship tower segment on the move toward Launch Complex 39A. It is now past the location of the vehicle assembly building and is on the way toward Pad 39A, heading east toward the Seaside Launch Complex that's just inland from the Atlantic Ocean. The move or transfer of this segment to Pad 39A is paused for about an hour to wait for some stormy weather to clear out of the area. Those storms are no longer in the immediate vicinity of the Kennedy Space Center, allowing this operation to proceed tonight. As you can see, the operation continues to move rather slowly through this narrow stretch of two-lane road near the vehicle assembly building. This is typically what we've seen before from the previous three segments that were moved out to the tower construction site at Pad 39A. We've seen the move slow down in this area near the VAB, or the vehicle assembly building. This is an area of road that is now slated to be widened to better facilitate hardware moves across the spaceport. This is a highly trafficked road that not only supports employee traffic and supply deliveries to the launch pads, but also flight hardware moves. In the future, SpaceX intends to use this road for moving the Super Heavy booster and Starship to Pad 39A from the factory area that's being built nearby at the Roberts Road facility, elsewhere here at the Kennedy Space Center. The road is also used to transfer Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rocket boosters from the Hangar X area, where those boosters are refurbished, out to either Pad 39A or Pad 40, SpaceX's two operational launch pads here in Florida, and payloads, encapsulated payloads for some SpaceX missions, and most United Launch Alliance missions are also rolled along this roadway to the launch pad. This road approximately follows the path of the crawler way that leads from the VAB to Pad 39A and Pad 39B. And speaking of Pad 39B is now in view on the right side of your frame. This is the launch pad that will be used for the first flight and subsequent flights of NASA's Space Launch System moon rocket on the Artemis missions to the moon. As you can see, the pad is empty. If you've tuned in for the previous Starship tower segment moves, you will notice that the Space Launch System moon rocket was out there for testing. It completed a wet dress rehearsal cryogenic fueling test back in June and has now been rolled back into the vehicle assembly building on July 2nd for final launch preparations. And we expect to see that moon rocket, the Space Launch System, move back to Pad 39B around August the 18th. Before then, we expect to see at least several more of these Starship tower segments moved out to Pad 39A. The two pads, 39A and 39B, are about 1.7 miles or 2.7 kilometers apart. They were originally built for the Apollo program for Saturn V rocket launches back in the 1960s, then refurbished and outfitted for the Space Shuttle program. At the end of the shuttle program, Pad 39B was transitioned for use initially for NASA's Constellation program, which was canceled in 2010, and then that was replaced by the Space Launch System, the heavy lift moon rocket that is now part of the Artemis program. So that's the home of the Artemis Space Launch System rocket at Pad 39B. Pad 39A was put up for lease by NASA after the final space shuttle flight from that pad in 2011. And SpaceX signed a lease to begin using Launch Complex 39A in 2014. The first Falcon 9 launch from Pad 39A occurred in February of 2017. So these are the two historic launch pads that date back now about 55 years since they were brought into operation in the mid to late 1960s. You're continuing to watch the move of the Starship launch pad tower segment number 4, heading toward Launch Complex 39A. In a few moments, you'll see pad 39A come into view in the background as the tower segment continues to move eastbound toward pad 39A. There it is in the background. That's the destination for tonight's move. And this segment number 4 will be stacked on the 3 segments that are already in place to build up the tower, the gantry structure that will support future launches of SpaceX's Super Heavy and Starship vehicles. On the right side of your frame now, you can see Pad 39A, the Falcon 9 launch site. As I mentioned earlier in our broadcast, the strong back structure, the white transporter erector arm is vertical out at Pad 39A right now. We expect to see that moved, lowered to be horizontal, then moved back into the hangar just on the southern perimeter of Pad 39A very soon, perhaps in the next day or so, in preparation for the next Falcon 9 launch from Pad 39A, which is scheduled for Sunday morning with the next batch of Starlink internet satellites. So an active launch pad at Complex 39A with Falcon 9 operations continuing and the construction in parallel of the next generation launch complex for SpaceX's giant Starship and Super Heavy vehicle, which will stand nearly 400 feet or 120 meters tall. And the gantry that's being built, that you're seeing that construction in progress today with this move, that gantry itself will stand more than 450 feet in height when complete. Continuing to watch live as segment number 4 for SpaceX's Starship and Super Heavy launch pad gantry moves out toward pad 39A. Behind this gantry segment that's on the move, you can see the first three segments of this tower already in place. Each of these segments is about 5 stories or so in height. And you can see that giant crane awaiting the arrival of the fourth tower segment. And once this segment is in place in the coming hours or days, we expect to see that crane hook up with a spreader bar to the top of this tower segment and then raise the tower segment on top of segment number 3 to continue the construction of this tower. After the tower segments are all in place, there are 9 in total. SpaceX will move the ring-shaped pedestal structure. That will be the structure on which the Super Heavy booster will be sitting during launch countdowns and launch preparations out to the pad. You can see some of the pipe-shaped structures already in place. That's where that pedestal will be sitting. And also, once the entire tower is in place, SpaceX will also move the so-called chopsticks arms. These are the arms that will move up and down the height of the tower to assist with stacking operations, as well as in the future, SpaceX wants to use these arms to actually catch the Super Heavy booster back on the launch pad after its flight to space. The Super Heavy booster, with its 33 Raptor engines, is designed to be fully reusable, much like the Falcon 9 booster. However, instead of landing on a drone ship or landing at a separate launch pad, the Super Heavy booster will be is designed to eventually, after some testing, come back to the launch site itself and land on the launch pad to be caught with these arms. So as you can see, SpaceX is making great haste in building out this launch pad, but a lot of work remains to fully outfit this launch site for the Starship program. In the meantime, SpaceX continues work on the Starship factory a few miles away, where the Starship and Super Heavy boosters will be stacked section by section and then rolled out to the launch pad for their missions to space. The building at just to the right of this gantry segment is the Falcon 9 hangar. That's where the Falcon 9 rockets are integrated and integrated with their payloads, and also integrated with the transporter erector arm for rollout to the pad before each Falcon 9 launch. Preparations inside the hangar should currently be underway for the next Falcon 9 launch from here in Florida, scheduled for Sunday morning with another batch of Starlink internet satellites. You're looking live at the fourth tower segment for SpaceX's Future Orbital Launch Site for the Super Heavy and Starship rocket here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Now about 1 mile remaining until it reaches Pad 39A, its destination tonight. This entire journey was about 7 miles in length, or roughly 11 kilometers, from SpaceX's Roberts Road facility here at the Kennedy Space Center. That's where SpaceX is building up each of these tower segments one by one, prefabricating a lot of the hardware on each segment before rolling them out to Pad 39A for stacking. And that minimizes some of the work that needs to be done at height with the segments stacked in place at the orbital launch site for the Starship program. You're seeing the Starship Tower segment now moving between our camera site and the Falcon 9 hangar at Pad 39A. It just is passing, at this point, it appears to be passing the location where the crawlerway, the NASA pathway that goes from the vehicle assembly building to 39A and Pad 39B, where that crawlerway splits. And from that junction, the rest of the way to Pad 39A is about 1 mile, or about 1.5 kilometers. We expect to see this segment, if the current pace continues, to arrive at Pad 39A, in the vicinity of Pad 39A, in the next half hour or so. And then it may take a little bit longer to actually get into place and go through the fence and get into place inside the perimeter of Pad 39A, within reach of the crane that is out there to lift this tower segment on top of the 3 segments already in place. Tonight's operation is now in the home stretch heading toward the destination of Launch Complex 39A. On the right side of your screen, you can see the segment number 4 for SpaceX's Starship launch site gantry here at the Kennedy Space Center, continuing to move toward its destination at Pad 39A. It will soon pass behind the Falcon 9 hangar. That's the building with the SpaceX name and the American flag on the side you see here. And then after a period of time, after a few minutes, we expect to see the gantry segment reemerge on the left side of that hangar and then move toward the crane location next to the tower segments that are already stacked at the orbital launch site. Tonight's operation is the first time so far of the 4 segment transfers that has occurred primarily in daylight hours. The other moves either began after dark or ended in total darkness after nightfall here in Florida. But it looks like the sun is setting about this time here in Florida, and we hope to see this gantry move completed before total darkness falls here on Florida Space Coast. And as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we're now about to see this Starship launch pad tower segment to disappear for a few minutes behind the hangar. And we'll wait for it to reemerge on the left-hand side of the hangar. And that will, when that reemerges, that'll be the final stretch of its journey toward the orbital launch site for the Super Heavy booster and the Starship rocket out at Launch Complex 39A. Now really less than a quarter mile or so to go, at least as the crow flies, from its current location to its destination tonight. And now that tower segment has passed behind the hangar from our camera position, from the point of view of our camera position here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. But we'll wait for that tower segment to reemerge in a few minutes on the left-hand side of the hangar to begin that final leg of the journey. While we wait for another visual of the Starship launch pad tower segment once it reemerges from behind the hangar, we invite you to contribute and support our coverage. You can do that in several ways. One of those is to become a member of our YouTube channel. And if you join at Mission Specialist tier or above, you have access to exclusive video that we produce that are only available to our members. You can also contribute through the Super Chat function on YouTube, or you can go to spaceflightnow.com and click the Members tab at the top of our homepage. You contribute that way and become a member on our website. The contributions we receive through our membership programs help us continue and expand our coverage of activities here on Florida Space Coast, like tonight's Starship Tower segment move, as well as launch activities here in Florida, and general space news coverage that we provide on a daily basis on spaceflightnow.com. So we do appreciate any contribution you can provide. We do thank everyone who has already joined, who has already contributed, and we salute you for supporting our coverage, and we really appreciate your support. And as promised and as advertised, the Starship Tower segment is reemerging from behind the hangar. This is the Falcon 9 hangar that's used for SpaceX launch operations at Pad 39A. The tower segment is now on the left-hand side of this hangar and has just a short ways to go to reach its stop position for tonight's operation, which will be within reach of the large crane out at Launch Complex 39A. That crane will be used in the coming days to hoist the 5-story tall segment on top of the 3 similar segments already stacked at Pad 39A. And with that, 4 of the 9 tower segments for the Starship gantry will be in place. Motion continues for this launch pad gantry tower segment, heading toward that crane you see in this view of pad 39A. That crane is the device that will be used in the coming days to raise this segment on top of the three other segments already in place at the growing Starship launch facility at pad 39A. We do expect the move to be completed here in the next few minutes. And we'll continue streaming until we see this motion stop until the segment appears to be in the position we've seen the previous segments stop at to end the transfer, to end the move within reach of that giant crane that'll be used again, as I mentioned, to stack this segment on top of the three segments already in position. And the motion of the self-propelled transporter with this tower segment has stopped. This appears to be roughly the same position we've seen the previous three segments stop at the end of their moves, but we'll wait a minute or two to see if there's any more motion. But it appears that the transfer for tonight has been completed. Again, we'll stand by for just a few moments to see if there's any resumption or any more motion remaining to get to the stop position where the transfer will be called complete and the crane will be within reach to grapple on top of this segment to stack it on top of the other three segments of the tower you see on the left-hand side of this view. Well, we've detected no further motion of the Starship tower segment after it came to a rest here, just to the right of the crane and to the right of the Starship tower that is being built up at Launch Complex 39A. So we believe tonight's transfer is complete. In the coming days, we expect that crane to rotate or move over into position, lower its cables to connect up to the top of this tower segment and lift it onto the three segments already in place. And with that, four of the nine segments or sections of this Starship gantry structure will be in place. We'll be streaming live views of the Launch Pad 39A area for our members in the coming days. And if this lift occurs during daylight, which we expect it to, all the lifts so far have occurred in daylight, we hope to be able to capture that on our members' live stream. We anticipate additional sections of this Starship tower to be rolled to Pad 39A in the coming weeks. With four now at Pad 39A, there are five additional segments still to go. And as I mentioned earlier in our coverage, once those nine sections are in place, SpaceX will then move on to moving the circular pedestal structure out to Pad 39A that'll go on top of the pipe-like structures that you may have seen earlier in daylight. The pedestal is where the Super Heavy booster will be sitting during launch preparations. And also the chopsticks arms used for to assist in stacking operations as well as recovery of the Super Heavy booster will also be transferred to the pad perhaps later this summer once all of these segments are stacked at Pad 39A. And we'll be covering each of those steps throughout the coming weeks. In parallel with the Starship pad construction at Launch Complex 39A, SpaceX continues Falcon 9 launch operations. There is a Falcon 9 launch scheduled from Pad 39A no earlier than Sunday with the batch of Starlink internet satellites. And we will be covering that also on our YouTube channel and on spaceflightnow.com. That will be the record-breaking 30-second orbital launch attempt from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station or the Kennedy Space Center this year. The most recent SpaceX mission was number 31 of the year, tying a record set just last year and tying a record also set back in 1966. Each of those years had 31 orbital launch attempts. Number 32 of this year is scheduled for Sunday here on Florida Space Coast. And we also hope you'll join us tomorrow on spaceflightnow.com for another SpaceX launch from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We'll be streaming that on spaceflightnow.com and look for our launch preview story and launch coverage tomorrow. That launch is scheduled for 10:39 a.m. Pacific time, 1:39 p.m. Eastern time, or 17:39 UTC, carrying 46 Starlink satellites into polar orbit from Vandenberg Space Force Base, located on the California coast between Los Angeles and San Francisco. So the launch schedule continues for SpaceX as SpaceX teams also move forward with the next generation of their rocket program, the Starship, here at the Kennedy Space Center. For those of you who contributed to our coverage tonight, we thank you. You can always become a member of our YouTube channel and contribute through the Super Chat function, or go to spaceflightnow.com, click the Members tab and become a member there. And all of your contributions and support goes toward helping us continue our coverage of the launch activity here in Florida and around the world. So until next time, I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You've watched segment number 4 of SpaceX's Starship launch pad tower move out to Pad 39A tonight, the 4th of 9 segments now at the launch site for the next generation Starship program. Thank you for joining us for our coverage tonight, and we'll see you next time.